Next on KQED Newsroom, a look back at 2014 and what to expect in the coming year. Plus, after 4 decades of public service, East Bay Congressman George Miller reflects on his career.
The passage of the Affordable Care Act was really key to me. That was a huge milestone.
Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Tonight, we reflect on the past year, the major stories that gripped our attention, and look forward to what may lie ahead in 2015. Joining me for the discussion are Michelle Quinn, San Jose Mercury News business columnist, Paul Rogers, San Jose Mercury News environment writer and managing editor for KQED Science, and Carla Marinucci, San Francisco Chronicle senior political writer. First, though, a quick review of some highlights of 2014. The year of the California drought and a statewide scramble over water. In January, Governor Brown declared a drought emergency.
Perhaps the worst drought that California has ever seen.
And ended the year with voter approval for a $7 billion bond to shore up the supply of water. Schools were tested. A landmark legal case challenged teacher tenure. City College of San Francisco fought to stay open.
Save City College! Save City College!
And the University of California set off student protests when it announced substantial tuition hikes. Rising housing prices and growing income gaps around the Bay Area left many feeling priced out.
We will continue to fight until our demands are met.
Some Silicon Valley high-tech darlings generated controversy for disrupting traditional industries, from transportation to hospitality. Lawmakers and the legal system struggle to keep up with new surveillance technologies that make it increasingly easy to spy on ordinary citizens. It was the 150th anniversary of Yosemite National Park, the 10th anniversary of the first same-sex wedding conducted at San Francisco City Hall, and the 25th anniversary of the Loma Prieta earthquake, while a major quake in August shook Napa Valley anew. The world mourned the sudden passing of Bay Area actor Robin Williams. The arrests of State Senator Leland Yee and Raymond Shrimp Boy Chow for alleged gun running made national headlines. Questions swirled over the construction of the new span of the Bay Bridge. In sports, the Giants won the World Series for the 3rd time in 5 years. November's midterm elections were a treasure trove for local politics. The Oakland mayor's race boasted 15 candidates.
That's jobs, better wages.
While one East Bay district voted a Republican into the state assembly for the first time in years. The Bay Area sparked national debates over taxing soda, banning plastic bags, and upping the minimum wage. Violence against women spurred outrage on college campuses and in the NFL.
Who do you protect?
Protests rocked the Bay Area and beyond over the killings of unarmed black males by white police officers. And 2014 ended with a flurry of storms that offered temporary but welcome relief to a state parched by one of the most severe droughts on record. And now on to the panel discussion. And since we were talking about the drought just now in the package, let's go to you, Paul, first of all, and talk about that. I mean, we've had some major significant storms. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says there's a 75% probability now that we'll have average or above average rainfall in the new year. Are you feeling good about what lies ahead for drought relief?
I am feeling good. Isn't it nice to finally have the word drought and good news next to each other? We've had 3 years of miserable, arid news about wells going dry and reservoirs running dry and farmers going out of business. And I am not here to tell you the drought is over, because that would be a little bit overzealous. But what we can say is that we've had literally the perfect storm that meteorologists would look for the beginning of the rainy season. Big, multiple soaking rain events, followed by several dry days, so we don't have flooding, so the creeks can go back down, and all that water is flowing into the reservoirs. And they're starting to fill up. Now, the problem is we have such a big deficit. Basically, in a lot of places in California, over the last 3 years, we've only got half as much rainfall as we normally would get. So I always tell people who are frustrated that we keep saying the drought isn't over, if your boss came to you and cut your pay by 50% for 3 years in a row, and then in the 4th year for a couple of weeks said, hey, I'm bumping it back up and a little bit more. Yeah. What would your savings account look like? What would your credit cards look like? It would take you a while to recover. Sure. So these reservoirs are filling, but they're still only, the big ones, about a third full. The snowpack in California is only about 50% of normal. But this outlook from NOAA is very, very positive, and it's not a guarantee, but it shows that there's a good likelihood that the weather we've been seeing in December is going to continue into the new year.
So can we flush the toilets? Can we put the bucket away in the bucket drawer?
Yes, you can.
She doesn't want to be responsible anymore.
I feel like there's been like this sort of moralizing about how we should change how we live, and I don't really know what's real or not.
Yeah, and well, and it has been necessary. You know, where by some measures we've been in the worst drought in 1,200 years by one scientific study that came out recently, and that's looking at the temperature, because 2014, although all the data won't be known until mid-January, is almost certainly going to end as the hottest year globally since records were taken in the 1880s. So when you combine the hot weather with the lack of rainfall in California, it's been really bad. But these soaking storms are also, you know, really near record. And so many places are starting to ease back on their requests to people. Santa Cruz, which had the strictest conservation rules in the state, has said we're going from mandatory to voluntary.
So, Paul, so much political capital was spent on this drought. As you know, Jerry Brown with the water bond, was that necessary? Or is the storage that has been planned?
Absolutely.
Do we need that now?
Absolutely. The $7.5 billion that voters approved was really important. We have a whole lot of things that will come out of that money. It's going to fund conservation programs, like when you buy a low flush toilet and you get $100 back from your water district. Right. It's going to fund water recycling, where we take sewage, clean it up, and use it for grass and other non-potable uses. It may build a big new reservoir. You know, the issue as the climate continues to change is not as much of the precipitation is falling in the Sierras as snow. And so if it all comes down in a few big rain events a year, you need more storage to catch it.
And we needed that infrastructure to be put in place. So.
Well, the voters certainly thought so, and they passed that by a very wide margin. The other really important thing that happened this year in 2014 with the drought was Jerry Brown signing the biggest and most important water law in 50 years in California, and that was the groundwater regulations. Sounds a little bit nerdy, but basically it's been the Wild West in a lot of the state, including the Central Valley. No rules. Farmers can pump as much as they want. Cities can pump as much as they want. Water tables have fallen by hundreds of feet. People are in almost a nuclear arms race against each other to see who can go deeper. It's very expensive, and it really is harmful to the environment. So Brown started to put in place the first rules, and they'll take years, but it really is a major turning point.
And speaking of Governor Jerry Brown, let's take a turn here to politics, because Governor Jerry Brown, elected to a historic 4th and final term.
That's right.
We're sort of seeing a graying of the Democratic Party. We've got Senator Boxer, who seems ready to retire. We've got Senator Feinstein, who hasn't said yet whether she'll run again.
That's right. We have the big three that you just mentioned, and then you've got a whole generation of baby boomer politicians in the state, of which George Miller is one, starting to leave office. We're at the beginning of what is going to be a very big changing, and everybody's looking at Governor Brown and that seat to see what happens. I mean, what we saw in 2014 with Governor Brown was less is more. He didn't campaign. He didn't have to. He just talked about the water bonds, Proposition 1 and 2. It barely makes any appearances, hardly does any speeches anywhere.
So what's he going to do in 2015?
He's a guy who's very confident. But there's a lot to do in California, as we know. When you talk about the budget, he still has to keep those Democrats from overspending up there in Sacramento. You're going to hear him talk about that at his State of the State speech. But there's also education, the crisis of tuition, how to pay for this, how to keep these prices from going up to the point where average families cannot afford to educate their kids. That's an issue. Infrastructure issues and legacy issues. He wants that high-speed rail. The Congress is not going to give him any money on that. Is he going to be able to do it despite, I think, some opposition, just popular opposition on that one? Water tunnels and water, the whole water project that he plans. The state is also looking at some very sort of big political issues when you talk about the protests that we saw about Ferguson and race relations. Police departments at a local level are trying to wrestle with how to handle these kind of protests. And so this goes to the whole issue of what could be looming in the next year that could take a lot of money to solve. Crime and issues like that is one of them, but another one is healthcare and pensions. The aging population and the aging government worker ranks are very expensive, and nobody's really figured out, none of these cities have figured out how to pay for those costs.
Now, there have been some clues, haven't there, that Brown is going to make some of these pension issues and public employee health care costs a bigger issue in 2015 now that he's reelected. Do you anticipate any I think sweeping reform attempts on that stuff? It's not popular
among
employees.
No, it's not popular, and he's going to face huge backlash from the unions on this one.
Definitely.
We've seen this in the election before. They flexed their muscles in November. They will do it again if he tries to corral these huge costs. And I think right now we're not sure how it's going to be handled, but particularly healthcare is dwarfing. I mean, is making the pensions look like a small problem in terms of how to pay for things.
And pension reform was such a huge issue in the San Jose mayor's race. It was the issue that pretty much drew the stark difference between the two candidates, Sam Ricardo and Dave Cortese.
You've got it right, Twee. I mean, you've got some of these financial issues you're starting to see some breaks even within the Democratic Party here in California. Moderates are coming to the fore. All this is a result of political reforms that have happened, and we saw it in the last election, and I think we're going to see it even more. The top two primary is going to create, I think, a huge rush for some of the offices that are open in the coming year.
Where does the Republican Party go on any of this? I mean, some analysts have tried to say, oh, they had a pretty good election in 2014. No, they didn't. Look, they lost all 7 of the constitutional offices. They lost the governor's race by 20 points without the governor even breaking a sweat. There's not a single one of California's 58 counties where Republicans have 50% registration. Not even Orange County. Not even.
Well, that's true. California was the anomaly.
They did make some gains with
Ashley Swearingen lost. All their bench candidates lost. Pete Peterson lost.
And I think you're right, Paul. You know, on one big issue, immigration, they're still behind the curve. And even when you talk about the whole new policy with Cuba, Republicans are opposed to it. Hispanic voters, Latin American voters love those policies for the most part, except for Cuban Americans who aren't a big vote here.
How do they come back? I don't ever see a Republican, and I'm serious on this, I do not see a Republican being elected governor of California in my lifetime.
But maybe a moderate.
Could they ever come
back? Like a Meg Whitman.
We had a moderate. He lost by 20 points. Kashkari, who was pro same-sex marriage. It's like, I don't know how this party ever turns around.
But that's going up against a legacy.
That's true.
You know, Brown is like,
Michelle,
an icon.
Yeah.
But I wanted to mention also this one thing about one of the most interesting elections was Honda Kana. And here was the moment for the tech industry to kind of come up, really exert, show his muscle, put a guy in that they like, a technocrat, a former Obama, kind of a moderate, and they got killed.
The incumbent won.
But he didn't come so far away. I mean, he was within 4 points of Honda, who's been there for 7 terms.
Right, same thing, a legacy.
So I think this may be one of the areas, too, where you're going to see change. But I think it was significant that Silicon Valley put up its own guy this time. That hasn't happened before, which is why that race.
Do you think he's going to run?
I think
it's
very
so.
likely that he will.
I don't think we've heard the last of him. I don't think we've heard the last of Neil Kashkari either.
He was a good candidate.
Yeah, let's talk about, since we're on the topic of Silicon Valley, let's talk about some of the big tech stories as well.
Right.
The sharing economy keeps on growing and growing. Every week we're seeing a story about Uber, it seems, and Airbnb keeps on making headlines. Where do you see all of that evolving?
Well, I think that we're going to keep seeing what's happening, which is the local governments are going to try to control the situation, either welcome it because they've got their own constituents who are Uber drivers, Uber users, Airbnb renters. So they've got a problem. What the strategy is that Uber, Airbnb, and these others get in and they get popular. And then the politicians or the regulators are like, but wait a second, you're not doing X, Y, Z correctly, or you're not looking out for consumer safety, but they've got a built-in base already. So I think we're going to still see those sort of conflicts and more pressure on Uber, Lyft, and other companies to do basic regulation.
But what's so interesting about this is these guys are supposed to be disruptors and revolutionaries, but they have the same crisis communications problems as corporate America does. What's with Uber and Twitter and some other? they have had tremendous problems on the public relations.
Right. Okay. So, but if you look at Uber, is only 5 years old, and they've gone from 0 to 53 companies and 53 countries, and so they've grown really fast, and so they really haven't, seeded their communications, and they've really done, their whole strategy is we're not going to ask for permission, we're just going to go in and start working. And that does not lead to good PR, making friends at the beginning.
And they are trying to reform their reputations because they've hired more than 150 lobbyists around the country to work on their issues. I wanted to also talk to you about some of the other big stories in tech, which is the whole diversity debate, the lack of diversity gender-wise, race-wise. And where do you see that going? Are we at a tipping point with big companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, disclosing their employment data for everybody to see?
It was just an amazing year because we always knew, we can look at pictures, what race and gender of the CEOs or the board. But this year, the companies started to reveal their data. And it was, it basically confirmed what most people thought, which is basically 70% men, 30% women. And what's going to happen next year is they're going to do it again. So we're going to have a comparison point. We're going to be able to say, how does 2015 compare to 2014? And chances are there's not going to be a big jump because these are some really hard problems. But I do think that the conversation is really ripe about what are the funnels, the tunnels and funnels going into Silicon Valley. There might be 5 professors at MIT, 5 at Stanford, 5 at UC Berkeley who are recommending hordes of people, and those are the people who really are making the decisions. So there's so much of this issue to peel back, and it dovetails with the whole issue in the Bay Area of the tech industry and income inequality and what's going on here. And just as Silicon Valley spreads and gets bigger and more successful and more wealth, the two valleys. And the Mercury News, we've been writing about the two valleys for decades. Well, that issue in the two Bay Areas.
And you get these flashpoints like the Google buses, obviously.
Flashpoints,
but it seems like Silicon Valley and technology in general had a great year.
Yeah,
I mean, the stock market soared. People got very, very rich. People who own houses in Silicon Valley got a lot richer. And the rest of the people did a little bit better, but the gap seems to be getting further and further.
There was a really interesting story that said maybe we're getting at a tipping point where the housing prices here and the commercial rents will start to hurt the valley, but I don't think so. I think that we're still going to have that echo effect of you got to be here.
And for the gay and lesbian community, I must say that also a major moment came when Apple CEO Tim Cook came out publicly. He's now the only CEO, openly gay CEO of a Fortune 1000 company who's a gay person.
And it was an amazing moment. People in the inner circles sort of knew, and people had written about it in some level. But for somebody to come out and say, "I'm doing this, and this is why," there was a time when that would have been a huge issue for Apple as a business, and he, bravely stood up. And it was an amazing moment.
Well, just so many major stories this past year. But now we're going to look ahead a little bit because we have a tradition on this show where we want your predictions for 2015. The pressure's on. We're going to begin with you, Michelle.
Okay. Well, I don't think there's a tech bubble. So this is one thing. So I don't think there's a tech bubble. But I do think, things are going crazy. And I'm going to predict that there's not going to be a major correction this year. That we're basically going to keep rolling along, and there's going to be little moments where maybe the market will drop 400 points and people will gasp, but it's going to keep going. So that's good news for tech. Not such great news if you're trying to buy a house, if you're hoping that the income inequality issue will get worked out.
Okay.
And one more or no?
No, I'm going to have to move on to Paul.
Let's move on.
That was good.
Right, sorry.
Paul, you get time.
The plastic bag companies who are trying to overturn California's law banning plastic bags will succeed and collect enough signatures to put it on the ballot. They'll succeed in 2015 for that, but voters will reject it. They will side with the enviros and the sea turtles, and they will turn back the bag companies in 2016 at the ballot box.
All right, Carla.
And in January, Barbara Boxer will announce she's going to retire, and you're going to see a beauty contest, a parade of Democrats who are going to go for this seat. These seats don't come up very often. There's no guarantee Feinstein will retire. And I would say tech might be interested because Sheryl Sandberg could be one of those ones that goes for it.
All right, and for me, since you guys already have California covered, I predict Senator Elizabeth Warren will run, and that may be interesting to see a Hillary Clinton versus Warren race. Huh? All right, so we'll see. Thank you all for being here. Paul Rogers, Michelle Quinn, and Carla Marinucci. And now, a lawmaker's reflection. East Bay Congressman George Miller is retiring after 40 years in Congress. A lifelong Bay Area resident, he's been known as the tireless advocate for education, labor, economic equality, and the environment. Miller was part of the so-called Watergate class of congressional members elected right after President Nixon resigned. Much has changed since Miller took office. Over the years, Congress has become increasingly polarized. 2015 promises to continue on this partisan path when Republicans take control of the Senate. Scott Schaefer sat down with Congressman Miller to look back at his distinguished career.
George Miller, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, after 20 terms in Congress, what does it feel like to be a short-termer?
It's pretty exciting. It's pretty exciting. I've had a wonderful career. I'm very proud of my body of work over those 40 years, those 20 terms. But I really believe it's time to come home.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about that decision in a minute. But, as you're leaving, a lot of people have talked about your career and what you've accomplished. In your mind, what stands out for you as the thing that was most important that you helped get done or got done?
Well, for me, one of the ideas that I worked on was access for poor and minority individuals in our society. So my work on disabilities community to get them access to schools, to get them access to well-trained and effective teachers.
And you were one of the key architects of the Affordable Care Act,
yes,
Obamacare.
Yes, it was a big thrill to be able to work, with people all over the country, including a lot of the medical community from the San Francisco Bay Area that helped us shape that legislation, and it's having a huge impact on families.
What do you make of Chuck Schumer, the senator from New York, saying a couple of weeks ago that maybe Obama shouldn't have focused on health care?
Well, I think it was a huge mistake. I think he recognizes that now. The fact is, you had the opportunity to do it in politics. That opportunity is very fleeting, no matter what the issue is. So you had the majority, you had the presidency, and you had to go do it then. There wasn't some other time when you could schedule it. The people have been scheduling national health care for 100 years in the Congress of the United States and have never gotten it done. Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama agreed, now's our moment, let's go. And that was pretty exciting.
You were one of the post-Watergate class. You got elected in 1974, just after Richard Nixon stepped down. What surprised you most looking back when you got to Washington? And in those first few years especially, what surprised you the most?
When I first got to Washington,
yeah.
Well, it was just overwhelming to me. I like to say, before I got elected to Congress, I thought back east was Reno. I'd never really been anywhere, and it was quite an experience to all of a sudden be part. And I think I understood, what privilege I had been given to be part of the governing board of the United States of America.
You were known as a legislator who could work across the aisle. You worked with Republicans, for example, on No Child Left Behind. And, as you say, that doesn't happen so much anymore, much less than it did when you perhaps got there. So what will it take to actually, you said an election, but is there anything else that you think the Democrats, for example, could do to make relationships better across the aisle?
Well, you have to work at it. You really have to work at it. You're working with people very often who don't think the same as you do. They don't come from the same environment. They don't come from California. They don't come from the Bay Area. And you have to understand that and then try to make that approach. And it takes time. Most of my legislation took 3, 4, 5, 10 years to get completed.
So you kind of wear them down?
Well, you wear them down and they recognize that there's still responsibilities to the country. You can disagree, work something out, move along and move the country, make the improvements, and you continue to work. No issue is final in politics. This isn't baseball where there's a final score that lives throughout history. No, you win it, you get a presidential signature, and the people who disagree with you or thought it went too far start the next day trying to change that policy.
How much of your decision to step down now had to do with the fact that you're in the minority, and it doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon, and it is so dysfunctional, so there's so much partisan gridlock? How much of maybe it just wasn't as much fun as it used to be?
No, I've had fun up until last Friday when I left. I had more fun than you can imagine. It really was about looking at the body of work that I created, recognizing some prompting from my sons. Dad, why don't you come home? And looking at that and say, why don't you you're very proud of this, let's go out the door with this. And the passage of the Affordable Care Act was really key to me. That was a huge milestone in my belief system and what I thought what the benefit would be for the country. And so it was just really a decision.
Yeah.
I think I should go home.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question about age. You're, I think, 68?
69.
69 years old. Nancy Pelosi's 74. Barbara Boxer, I think, is 76. Dianne Feinstein's 81, the oldest senator in the United States Senate. There's a new generation of Democrats here in California. Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, to name just two. Is it, no one wants to say you're too old to serve?
Sure.
But is it time, do you think, for
I think you always have to be cognizant of it. Nancy Pelosi used to kid me. I'm always talking about the incoming class, and what are you doing observing this? I sit in the back of the chamber. I said, I'm trying to find those people who can fill in. We've got to have transitions. We've got to bring new people into this policy committee or the WIPS organizations and start integrating this. You can't,
hang on too long.
Can't hang on too long, and I think it's really important, especially in a dynamic democracy like ours. You got to have a lot of energy level. You got to have different points of view. You got to have generational points of view. Very different, this incoming class than me. Okay, and you have to recognize that. That's not a criticism. That's just a recognition of the dynamics of American society.
So if Barbara Boxer or Dianne Feinstein came to you, and maybe they have, and said, George, what do you think? I'm thinking of doing what you did. What would you say?
I would say think hard and long about it, and think about it in a very positive fashion. You've made this massive, in the case of Barbara and Dianne, they've made a massive contribution in legislative and policy in this country. So you've done it.
Well, I'm wondering if you have any advice for the young people coming up, the new folks who are thinking of climbing the ladder, maybe running for Congress, or who are there now, the freshman class.
Well, when I went to Congress, it was a very strict seniority system, and we threw a lot of chairmen out. We voted them out. We overturned the seniority system. There's more opportunity today. I try to tell young people, make your own weather. Don't be hamstrung by the Congress and its procedures and its processes. If you're interested in violence against women, if you're interested in early childhood care, if you're interested in defense policy, go make your own weather in those areas. And it'll come to you, and you'll be ready when the opportunity comes. You have to make the opportunity. You can, or otherwise you're sort of like a bump on the log. What the hell are you doing there?
All right. Well, George Miller, thanks for making good weather for so many years, and thanks for your service.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
And that is it for tonight. For all of us at KQED, thank you so much for joining us. And for our coverage, please go to kqednews.org. I'm Thuy Vu. Thanks for watching. Have a happy new year and a good night.